Hello, and welcome to AWS Review, a weekly look at what's happening at AWS and how it may change how you do business. I am your host, Michael Krause. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Charter Solutions, where we help organizations change and innovate quickly by accelerating their acquisition and use of data.
And I'm your co-host, John Athelter. I'm a lead technical architect on the AWS specialist team at Salesforce, where I work with potential customers, helping them envision the possibilities that AWS and Salesforce enables.
Welcome back to another show, John, and we have our first snow of the winter.
Yeah, well, there might have been a couple of drizzles here and there, but the first real one where,
It's actually staying around for a couple of days, so maybe
yeah,
it's
yeah,
shoveling.
not like when I lived in Colorado, it would snow and then in 20 minutes it'd all be gone. So I think it's going to stick around for a while. I don't really mind the snow. It's the cold for me. I rather enjoy the snow. I don't like the bitter cold with the wind. It's the
I know,
classic Minnesota saying. Just
and I would prefer winter with snow than winter without snow.
yes, absolutely.
It's
Yep.
I've seen too many winters recently where it's like no snow until January. It's just kind of a brown Christmas kind of thing.
Oh yeah, no, that's not anything I like, and I like my winter sports and whatnot. So I'm optimistic about this winter. So we shall see.
I would love to have a really nice white winter this year. That would be
Yeah.
so fun, so much fun. All right. Well, we should move to the topic for the day. And today we're going to be taking a deeper look at Amazon S3 and see all the features that it has to offer. We've mentioned S3 a lot in a lot of our other episodes, but we realized that we never actually sat down and talked about S3 itself for people who may not be familiar with S3 itself or the breadth of capabilities that S3 brings to the table. Hello, everybody. I'm interrupting today's session because I wanted to let you know that when John and I recorded this, it turned out to be a lot of content. So we decided to break it up into two separate episodes. So what you're watching today is part one. We'll be releasing part two very soon. Thank you.
So I'll just ask you right off the bat, what is S3?
So S3, the official name is Simple Storage Solution. So the three S's, hence everybody calls it S3. That's become the moniker today. S3 is a uh, officially what they refer to as an object store. So you can store any type of digital object, whether it's a text file, an image, a video. Probably the closest, you know, analogy that most listeners would be aware of is storing files on your hard drive. You can almost think of it like a giant hard drive in the cloud on AWS. But what it brings to the table is virtually unlimited storage. File sizes can be extremely large, and you can have, you know, as many as you need. I've worked on projects where we had, billions of files out there. And I've worked on projects where we're processing audio, processing video, processing text, and storing it and retrieving it from Amazon S3. But it's not just a file store or like it's not just a hard drive. It brings some other features to the table as well. And some of the best known ones are its availability and durability. So if you store a file or an object on S3, Amazon's service level agreement, their SLA, is 4 nines of availability, which means over the course of a year, that file is available for you to retrieve 99.99% of the time. There may be some outages where there's a short period where you can't get at it. But once that outage is over, it's accessible again. But durability is the more interesting one. Durability has to do with guaranteeing that the file stays there, right? Just because you can't get access to it doesn't mean it's gone. It's like you can't get access to the internet because your router's having a problem. Once the router's fixed, the internet's still out there. The internet didn't go away.
Mhm.
S3 provides 11 nines of durability, which means any file, anything that you put on S3 is 99.99s available or durable, which means it will be there. They're guaranteeing that If you had 100 files that you put out there, 99.119 or 99s of them,
Yep.
it would still be there, a year from now.
Is that 3 more than Six Sigma would be, or is that more?
I'd have to go and figure that one out. I
That's
don't know.
6 more, because I think Six Sigma is 6 nines, or
Yeah,
maybe it's the 6 9, maybe it's 99.9. But anyways, that's pretty incredible.
this
And
is this is huge, and I mean, what's kind of funny is you think about backups and tape backups and storing them off site, and if you look at the probability of data loss on a backup tape that you store off site, just from anything from you know degradation of the tape to sunspots to all kinds of different things, tape backups aren't this good,
and
right?
that's saying a lot, and there's a lot of human error that can come with that as well. That, you have to think AWS has people that this is all they do every day. They're experts
Yep.
in it, where you might have had somebody that's your system engineer that's, walking back tapes back in the day.
Yeah, and accidentally erasing the tapes and all of that
Yeah,
stuff.
absolutely. So, talk to me a little bit about what makes up S3, just kind of the different pieces of it.
Sure. Sure. So S3, I'm going to use the hard drive analogy, right?
Mm.
So on hard drives, you've got your hard drive. You may have a computer with two or three different hard drives on it, right? If you're running a Windows machine, you might have your C drive and your D drive and your E drive,
Mhm.
and then within that um, hard drive, you'll have directories, and inside those directories, you'll have files. So the terminology that S3 uses is they have these things called buckets, and a bucket analogous to a hard drive, right?
Mhm.
It could contain all kinds of different files. And the reasoning for having different buckets is could range anywhere from isolation and security to just organization, right? You could put everything in one hard drive, you put everything in one bucket, you could put things in different buckets, different hard drives. Um, in S3, you also have what are called objects. These are analogous to the files on your hard drive.
Mhm.
And then you have something called keys. And the keys are analogous to the path, your directory path to the file, right? Um, so in S3, just to get a little technical, there actually isn't officially any kind of hierarchical directory structure.
Mm.
S3 is flat. It's a bucket with a whole bunch of objects, but the objects are all named with the key and the object, right? It's just convention that people use slash, Bob slash Tom slash,
Yep.
file name, right? Uh, because it's something that is familiar. It's a metaphor that's familiar to people. But you'll hear bucket, key, object, and, just think of it as hard drive, path, file name, and file,
Mhm.
right? The other thing you can do with S3 is in addition to having these objects and keys, you can actually have S3 store multiple versions of objects. So it has a versioning capability. And anytime you write a new version of it, you can have it hold on to a certain number of historical versions as well. And then if you go forward and say, hey, give me that file, it'll always give you the most recent. But you have the ability to say, hey, actually give me two prior to the recent one,
Mhm.
and get that history. So if you have something that is changing regularly and you want to maintain a history of those changes, versioning in S3 would allow you to do that. So when you think about a file, the things that let you kind of define that file is the object name, the key, which is the path to it, the bucket, which is its hard drive, and the version number.
Mhm. And how do these things, and we can dive into this later, but maybe sprinkle it in as we go through use cases. But how 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 would your strategy around this, be changed based on the types of use cases that you have? Between how you're doing your naming, how you're doing buckets, keys, versions, and maybe don't answer that directly now, but maybe as we go through these common use cases, that's what I'm most interested in, is hearing about that
Yeah.
and hearing some of your knowledge there. So, I guess what are some of these common use cases where you'd see utilizing S3?
So, the most some of the more common ones that you're going to hear about is just storing large files. Let's start there, right?
Yep.
If you need to store image files, large documents, things like that, you know, in the past, if you were creating an application or something like that, you would either stick it in the database, which if they're large things get cumbersome, or you'd store it in a file server somewhere and put a pointer to the file on the file server on the database.
Yep.
Well, the problem with having a file server is now you've got another computer that's a point of failure and could fail, and you have to do backups and all of that stuff. Um, you can use S3 the same way. Put it on an S3, put a pointer to the S3 location in there. That's probably generically the most common use case is just general storage of files.
Hmm.
Okay? Um, it's not, you can't map it easily to your computer and use it like a file server, but there are tools that we can talk about in future ones that will help you with that. Things like uh, File Gateway from AWS.
Hmm.
But if we take that concept of just storing general storage of files a little bit further, think about backups of your computers, backups of your databases, right? Those backups are backup files. You can store those on S3. You can store many versions of those on S3. Back up your SQL Server database or your Oracle database, take that backup file, put it on S3, and now you have the ability to go and just get that backup file real quickly and
Hmm.
bring it back and use it. Um, Same thing from archiving. You can export data from different systems out onto S3 and archive data and use it for long-term storage. And we'll talk a little bit about costs in a few minutes to help you understand why. And then there are some specific things. So, with the advent of data lakes on cloud platforms and especially on AWS, S3 is a fairly common storage mechanism for data lake data. And
Hmm.
there are other technologies available on AWS that work with that, like AWS Glue, Amazon Athena, Data Brew, um, Lake Formation. They use S3 as a backend storage mechanism and then allow you to query that data in S3 and process it, store it back to S3, store it elsewhere, et cetera. So that's one specific thing. And in that scenario, you'll have, a common pattern we've seen is that you'll have buckets for different zones of your data lake. So you might have a landing zone where fresh data from outside the organization full comes in. You might have a raw zone where you store and maintain the original data that you got. You might have a structured or standardized zone where you've taken that data and standardized it to common date formats and things like that. You might have a curated zone. And all of those could be separate buckets. That's a fairly common pattern. Within those buckets, in your standardized zone, you might have many different chunks of data. Using Salesforce, you might have Salesforce contacts, you may have accounts, you may have opportunities, you may have leads. Um, those actually would be separate keys or separate subdirectories under that with the associated files in there as well. So there's one specific example. Another one that's even more specific, and people who use S3 a lot and build web apps on Amazon are familiar with this. Other people may not. You can actually use S3 as a static web server.
Yeah.
So you can take, if you have a static website or you have static assets, which could be everything from uh, imagery to uh, JavaScript files to things like that that you need to be able to serve up. You don't need to spin up an EC2 instance and run, Apache on it or something like that. You can actually create an S3 bucket, tell S3 that this is going to be a HTTP endpoint that you're
Yep.
actually hosting, put all your static files out there, and then go to AWS's DNS service, Route 53, and configure it to point to that S3 bucket um, as the HTTP server. And now you've got a web server and you have no servers to do it.
Yeah. I think that's pretty amazing. And I've just kind of messed it around. I quickly built, a website, and then, I utilized some cloud formation scripts that were already pre-built and built a real-time translation app that you could just host and have, be able to do translations and not that real time just because there was, it was just kind of off the cuff and really quick. But it's just amazing how quickly you can spin up a service like that and have it out on the web. And you're not having to do a ton of different things when setting up a ton of different servers. It's all being run right off S3. And then the code is just doing the work for you. So
Yeah,
it's
I've
amazing.
I've built or been part of building a number of fully serverless dynamic websites, right? So we do a single page app. So we're running React or Vue or something like that to render the in the browser. But all the JavaScript for that, all of the graphic production assets, all the configuration stuff is stored on S3 as an HTTP site. And then we're using API gateway and lambdas to represent the REST endpoints for the back end for the single page app to talk to. So we have no servers.
It's yeah, really, truly serverless, right? So I think that that's it. It's amazing the dynamic utilization of S3 because when I think of S3, obviously, when we work together, it's you think of data lakes and
Yep.
that's what you think of. And you don't really understand, I guess, the breadth of S3 and all the other places where it could be utilized, where it's probably being used by a good portion of the websites that you're going on these days, and you just won't even know in the background. So it's
Well,
pretty cool.
here's something that a little trick that we've used numerous times on websites.
Well,
Oftentimes,
to go see,
what's
yes,
that?
to go see if it's running on S3 or not.
Yeah, but we've had a number of websites that we've built where we've had um, things that people upload and download. Things like could be anything from a profile image, right? I want to upload an image of my profile image, or I have I'm uploading articles and there's images as part of those articles and things like that. What we did was, we didn't store those images in the database. We stored them on S3.
Yeah.
So now that I want to go and I want to display those images in the browser, what do I do? Well, I could create a REST API that you could call and it would go and load that image off S3 and it would encode it and it would send it back across the HTTP connection. And then you could decode it in the browser and display it, right?
Yes.
That's not the easy way. The easy way is um, S3 has this concept of a pre-signed URL.
Oh yeah.
So with the right security privileges, every asset in S3 is accessible as an HTTP object.
Mhm.
Okay. And with a pre-signed URL, basically what you're doing is creating temporary rights for a period of time to that object. So what we would do is we would send, you'd call the REST endpoint and we would send back, oh, here's all your data, including pre-signed URLs with like a 5 minute or 3 minute timeout on it for the assets. And you just take that pre-signed URL and you just put it as an HTTP image reference and it just automatically loads from S3.
Just like that, and no even to worry about the coding and encoding with
Exactly.
that's yeah, I those little things like that that are such a game changer and just any application that you want to be able to build quickly and try to do that in an efficient manner, and also the democratization of building and being able to, give people anywhere in the world an idea and give them some instructions and be able to really actually build something that could be used. So I think
Yeah.
that's pretty.
Well, and this is where everybody who's listening goes, yeah, this is all really cool, but it's got to be really expensive, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, right. So, so how much does it cost? Let's hear about some of the
Yeah, $100. So S3, just standard storing stuff on S3 costs you 2.3 cents per gigabyte per month.
that's you can get a lot of storage for a couple bucks there.
Yeah, 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 yeah. If you do the full math out, you're talking around $25 a month for a terabyte of data.
Yes.
you know, and that's the standard that gives you everything we talked about, the 11 nines of durability, the 4 nines of availability, all of that stuff, 2.3 cents per gigabyte per month. Um, but
And all access, it's all accessible right away. You can
yep,
get
it's
it.
all accessible right
Like,
away. They take a look at your usage over the month and calculate kind of the average, and that's what they use for the basis, of they actually, gigabyte storage hours, right? So if I put a file that's a terabyte out there for 10 hours, I only pay for 10 hours of storage of that terabyte of data. That if I delete it, I don't
oh, well,
pay for
yeah.
the terabyte for the entire, I pay really for usage, right? The price is calculated at, 2.3 cents per gigabyte per month, but it's actually, I believe if I recall correctly, it's actually gigabyte hours that they're
Oh,
that they're calculating throughout the month.
and that's obviously makes it a lot easier to try out very large data sets and
Yep.
ingest those and then just get rid of them afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you wanted to drop like, a petabyte of data on S3 and play with it for 2 days and delete it, you're not gonna pay for a petabyte for the month.
Yeah.
You're gonna pay for a petabyte for 2 days.
That's, you can get a lot of stuff done with lot amount of data in 2 days,
Yeah,
and being able to cycle through different types of use cases as well. And also, being able to cycle it through the different types of storage classes. So talk a little bit about maybe some of the other storage classes
yeah,
and maybe some of the concepts that are tied to those.
yeah. So, I kinda talked about standard storage, and that's typically where everybody starts. But depending on how you're using that data, Amazon actually offers other options as well. So, for example, they have standard infrequent access. Okay, so you get the same durability, same availability, but rather than 2.3 cents per gigabyte, you pay 1.25 cents per gigabyte, and there is a small retrieval fee. So, what ends up happening there is if I have a lot of data and I need to hold on to it, right? Like document retention kind of stuff. I almost never go and look at that data.
Yep. Or maybe compliance where it's, hey, maybe this is something that comes up
Yeah.
maybe
Once
once.
a year, we have to go look at it or something
Yeah.
like that. You literally are paying less than half the price for the infrequent access, right? If you don't need the level of durability that comes with standard, you can go for one zone infrequent access. So Amazon breaks the regions into multiple availability zones. And the way they get the durability is when they store your file behind the scenes, they don't store it on a single drive. They
Oh,
store it multiple times in multiple availability zones. So if an entire availability zone goes down, your
yep.
file's still there and it's still accessible. One zone infrequent access drops your durability and availability down to the SLAs for a single zone, but now you're paying 1 cent per gigabyte per month.
Yep. Well, could you really theoretically be using one zone infrequent access, maybe in a totally different region, and then, utilizing standard in the most common regions as well? Would that?
Absolutely. And the key here is also the infrequent access.
Yep.
The idea is there is a small, very small fee, and you can go out to the S3 pricing page and see all the details on these. But it's not just pay for the data storage. There's a small fee for accessing the data.
Yep.
And, you know, if you're not using it very much, the cost of that fee is negligible relative to the savings that you get by going with the infrequent access. If you're hitting these things all the time, so if you're using like we were mentioning before, profile pictures on S3 that show up on the websites, you're hitting those things all the time.
Yep.
Doesn't make sense to go for infrequent access. Now, um, there's a whole nother thing related to S3 that I'll mention here, but we're not going to go in depth on, which is Amazon Glacier.
Yep.
So Glacier is, think of it as cold storage. Think of it as your tape backup offsite kind of thing, right? Glacier pricing is even cheaper, but it's really meant for true infrequent access, right? Standard Glacier, and I mean, they've changed things now. They've got like instant access Glacier and deep archive
Yeah.
Glacier, all these things now. But the standard one is you could have to wait up to 3 to 4 hours before they get the
Mhm.
data back to you,
Yep.
right? But there you're paying half a cent or less per gigabyte per month for that storage, right? So it's like, hey, I'm going to keep my last backup on S3 standard. I'm going to keep the 5 backups prior to that on standard infrequent access. And I'm going to keep 5 years of backups prior to that in Glacier,
Yep.
right? Um, so recognize Glacier is out there. We'll probably do another episode on Glacier to help people out with that, but be
Yeah.
aware, we'll check it out if you're interested.
Yep.
Now, the hard part here is
How do you figure out when
ready,
to
right
when
there.
to
Figure it out. It's like, it's easy if I know that I have this data over here, this class of data, and I want this in standard. I have this class of data, and I want this in infrequent access. But we've talked a lot about data lakes. I have a data lake, and I have a bucket, and I have files from all kinds of different things.
Mhm.
And some of them I'm querying all the time, and I really want them on standard. And some of them I don't. Imagine a data lake of Salesforce data
Mhm.
of accounts. And the only accounts you query tend to be ones that have had any activity in the last month.
Yep.
So maybe 80% of your accounts are somewhat inactive,
Mhm.
but you're paying that 2.3 gigabytes a month for those so that they're classed. And it's not easy to tease those apart
Yep.
because they're spread all out inside the same bucket. So Amazon introduced a little while ago this thing called S3 intelligent tiering, where they will actually take every single individual object and they will monitor its usage patterns, and they will automatically shift it between frequent access, the standard, which is 2.3 cents per gigabyte per month, standard infrequent access, and archive instant access, which is Glacier instant access. So your pricing there is 2.3 cents a month for the frequent access stuff, 1.25 cents a month for infrequent access, and point 0.4 cents a month, less than half a cent for the archive access stuff. And it'll automatically shift them. If you start hitting a set of files on a regular basis, it'll move them from archive into standard.
So it's really, it's like what, point 2 cents more per giga or per what was that over the month,
Yep.
per
For
thousand objects. It's I can't imagine the cost savings that it would have, not just from the actual pure, you know, technical part of it, but
yep.
also just the people hours that would have to go in to actually manage all of this and the level of knowledge around the workloads and knowledge around, being able to set up all those automations. It's incredible.
Yeah. So I mean, like you mentioned, Amazon charges you for doing that work for you, but the
Yep.
cost is 2.5 cents per thousand objects, per thousand files. You'll make that up really fast.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like a no-brainer in my mind. If you're dealing with any quantity of files, just the savings between going from frequent to infrequent access more than covers that cost. And now you don't have a headache.
Yeah, right. I
Automatically get
mean, think about a system engineer. Let's say they get paid anywhere from 100 to 200K a year, and
Yep.
just even the few seconds of them working on that is going to make that up. So,
Yeah,
so
well, and as humans, we have a tendency to do wide swaths. So
yep.
there are huge amounts of opportunity in there that they can do at a finer granularity than we can.
Yeah, and it's like this is what they do all day, every day. They specialize in this. Why not leverage a little bit of the learning and the innovation that has made Amazon and AWS such a behemoth and working at economies of scale? Because, like we mentioned before, everything that they do internally, they try to give that to the community too. So,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
when you're working through this and working through storage management, obviously you can utilize S3 intelligent tiering, but what about just the concepts behind storage management and some of the things you should be thinking about when you're working with S3?
So people who've been using S3, probably the thing they're most familiar with is lifecycle management.
Mhm.
And lifecycle management, um, before we used to have the intelligent tiering, we used to use lifecycle management to roll things off to Amazon Glacier. You say, hey, after a particular file or object has been here for 6 months, move it to Glacier,
Mhm.
right? The other thing you can do with lifecycle management is delete files. So I can say, hey, I've got this file. I want it to hang around, but I don't want it to hang around more than 2 years.
Mhm.
So you can create a life cycle on an S3 bucket that says for any file, after 2 years have passed, delete this file.
Mhm. Mhm.
Intelligent tiering kind of adds another layer in there where they're kind of automatically watching constantly, but you can still combine intelligent tiering and some life cycle stuff to do that. We've got clients where we store data in S3 and it's meant to be temporary.
Mhm.
The temporary store, we put it out there for a period of time while we're transferring it from one place to another. Um, but our app is actually designed to delete those files once it's complete.
Mhm.
But exceptions happen, errors occur, things like that. So we'll take these files, and I mean, in period of a few days, I mean, these could be terabytes of data that we're shuffling through S3,
Yep.
and we'll use lifecycle rules that say, hey, after it's been around for 2 days, delete it.
Yep.
Because if it's been there for 2 days, something happened in our app and we missed deleting it in the app. So we can
Yep.
constantly keep that cleaned up.
Mhm. Mhm. That makes sense. And, kind of, adding a little stop loss or kind of like different protection gates around what the AI would be controlling too, which,
Right.
which is, it's a good thing. Otherwise you have, instant, you can't always trust AI 100%. And
Yep.
it's good to have little, like stop losses there. I think about a large real estate company that bought up a lot of homes with an automatic, I won't get into that.
I love those stories.
Yeah, so,
So,
um,
so there are a couple of other things that are interesting here, just from a standpoint of data safety, if you
mhm,
will. Right. So there's replication, which means S3 is kind of regional, and I say kinda because they've got global endpoints and things like that that let you hit different regions. But really, the data is stored in a region on in Amazon. Um, but if 11 nines of durability is not enough for you, you
oh,
can use
it never is, right?
yeah, you can use replication to put copies of those files elsewhere. Or if you know you've got for latency purposes, you want copies, in Europe and Asia
Mhm.
Pac and things like that, you can actually set up replication to replicate those files when they show up in your main S3 region, replicate them out to other ones. So there's many reasons you might want to use replication. If you're storing backups, right? It's always a good idea to keep your backups, keep a copy in another region.
Yes.
And, so you can actually have a bucket on S3 for backups. And as you do backups of your servers and your databases and all that stuff, you can keep it there locally, but you can also shove a copy off into another region. So if that region goes down,
Yeah.
and you've got a DR strategy that allows you to, via CloudFormation, spin your infrastructure up in another region,
Mhm.
you can already have all your backups to restore from over in that region.
Yeah, which is, I think obviously in a tumultuous world, it's always probably a good thing to have those types of backup plans, especially
Yep.
if you're a global company. Um,
Oh, yeah.
it's just it's something that I've found, and maybe I don't know if you've seen this, but it used to be something we used to always be thinking about. Like now, I feel like people have kind of got away from thinking about backups and everything as we move to the cloud because it's always just doing it for you. But you do have to take those extra steps, I think. So
Yeah. Yeah, I always tell people that data security, data management, regulatory compliance, all these things do not go away with the cloud.
yeah,
They don't become less with the cloud. You just can approach them differently and you can approach them in a
mhm,
more cost effective manner.
yep,
Right. But you still need to have, you know, what happens if what's the risk of the US East 1 region of Virginia of AWS going down?
yeah,
And what is your business risk if it goes down? Right.
yep,
Unless it, you have a kind of a Holocaust apocalyptic kind of scenario that literally destroys all the AWS
Mhm.
physical premises, the chances are they'll be back up before long, but you might be down for a while,
Yeah.
right? And if your business can't handle being down for a while, then what are your options, right? Well, I could spin up in another region. Okay. How do I make sure that happens? Well, I need to make sure all my CloudFormation scripts, all my configurations, all my backups, everything is available in that other region so that I can make it happen.
And all the code is tied to be able
Yep.
to work with that region too, because
Exactly.
there's a lot of interesting
A
nuance.
lot of different pieces there, but it's stuff that you have to think about. Um, so yeah, and the other data protection thing, and we'll talk also more about access control. There's S3 has a ton of different capabilities around
Yeah.
controlling who can access things, but similar to thinking about the files on your hard drive, you can take a file and say, hey, Michael can read and write that file,
Mhm.
and John can only read that file.
Yep.
But if John is granted write access temporarily, John could overwrite and delete that file.
Yep.
Yeah. Or I could overwrite and delete that file because I do have the right access. Right. So S3 also has this capability called object lock. And basically, when you turn on object lock, it locks that file. It cannot be deleted until you actively go in and turn off that object lock. So it
Yep.
makes it a multi-step process. I mean, could you eventually do it? Yes. But what you can do is by turning that on and limiting who can turn on and off object locks, I can't have somebody who happens to have write access, they can't accidentally delete it.
And especially in the world of infrastructure as code, and like a couple
Yeah.
of little things in a cloud formation script could wipe everything out. So
Right.
it's definitely a good another great risk strategies. So
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So those are kind of some of the things you can do, you know, from a storage level, just general storage management. They've got a very rich SDK and API that allows you to do a lot of operations on the files, including batch operations.
yeah.
So yeah, there's just a ton of stuff. Copying files from one location, not one bucket to another. Lots and lots of capability there.
Well, I'd like to maybe dive in a little deeper on that, on all that as well. So there's a lot of things that you could do with the access management, but also that can tie in really to how you're doing management and movement of the data and who gets to move what.
Yep.
And so, maybe walk into a little bit about how some of these different access management strategies match up with the storage management that you're doing, and how people are accessing S3 too.
Yeah. So there's a boy there. Yeah. Again, this is
It's
a
a whole nother show, really.
yeah.
And
It could be a whole nother show. A whole nother show. Um, so Amazon S3 has a lot of things around how do you control access to the objects in S3. So a couple of the basic ones that we start off with is the concept of private versus public buckets.
Mhm.
And very simply, a private bucket has no network pathing from the internet, public internet to the bucket. A public bucket does. Now that doesn't mean a public bucket automatically grants everybody rights to access because there are policies and access control things that are applied on top of that. But by just making it private, you literally cut the network cable to the public internet.
Mhm.
Okay. So, for example, when we do data lakes, the concept of a landing zone is a very common concept.
Yeah.
And a landing zone is a public bucket. And the idea of it is if I have partners, external entities that are going to be sending me data, uploading it via FTP or just an S3 direct upload or anything like that, I need a place for them to put it.
Yep.
So a public bucket is accessible to the internet. I can create a public bucket. I can create a path under that bucket for Salesforce, for example.
Yep.
And I could have say, okay, Salesforce, I'm going to give you a user ID that has rights to this path in that bucket. And you can go and write your files there. Okay. What we do when we build out data lakes is we monitor that bucket And anytime a new file arrives, we immediately move that file using the API from that landing bucket to a raw zone bucket that has zero public access. So that
Yep.
file only exists in that public access bucket for a fraction of a second to a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
So
So you really can get the access and being
yep,
able to have people send that with the security on top of it. And you have a lot of different things that you can do in just that, right from the landing zone to the raw zone too. You obviously want to keep it in its original form so you can understand the data lineage and everything that's tied to that too. So
the other use case we mentioned earlier of using S3 as a website, HTTP endpoint for web assets, there that bucket should be public
yep.
because the purpose of it, you want everybody on the internet to be able to hit that website, right? So that's it. But by default, Amazon will automatically make your buckets private. So it becomes an extra step you have to do to say, no, I recognize I actually have a need here for it to be public. I will go flip that switch.
Yep. And they make sure to really call it out too when you're doing it. They almost have a couple of, are you sure? Are you sure about this? You really want to do that? So
Yep. And you can, you know, if you're familiar with rights and privileges within AWS, you're familiar with IAM, you're familiar with policies and roles. Um, you have full IAM policy management, so you can create policies that represent access to specific buckets or specific wildcarded paths within buckets.
yeah,
I
that's
can say, I want to give John read access to the /Michael/cool pictures path on this particular S3 bucket. And that's it. You won't be able to see anything else. You'll only be able to read things in that particular path. Um, and I can do that. Oops, looks like we lost John. Hopefully he'll be back in a moment. Um, and we can take and create those paths in uh, policies on IAM and then grant those things to individual users, internal users, external users, users who might be available via federated identity. Um, Additionally, S3 supports bucket policies. Now, bucket policies are policies that are specific to a bucket. They're independent of the policies in IAM and are oftentimes used to uh, allow us to specify kind of global access policies that will always apply to that bucket. Welcome back, John.
hey, lost you there for a second. I'm back.
The snowstorm must be really bad.
Yeah, right. It's tearing up the local ISPs around you.
So I just chatted when you bounced out. I just kind of completed chatting a little bit about IAM policies and access and bucket policies as well.
Hello, and thank you for watching part one of the S3 deep dive episode. We'll be releasing part two very soon. Please look forward to it. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.